Did you know that over 30,000 people are now living on the streets in Florida? Asterisk, asterisk, and that number is growing faster than anywhere else in the country? In cities like Miami and Tampa, tent communities have exploded. Beaches once known for sunshine and luxury are now dotted with makeshift shelters, crying babies, and drug needles. Florida isn't just dealing with homelessness, it's unraveling. But how did it get this bad? Why is one of the richest states in America facing what some experts are calling a humanitarian disaster? Behind the headlines are stories of broken systems, rising rent, mental health collapse, drug chaos, and political neglect. The worst part, most people don't even see it until it's too late. And what's happening in Florida might just be a warning sign for the rest of the country. In this video, we're breaking down the top 10 reasons why Florida's homeless crisis is spinning out of control. And trust us, #1 will shock you. Number 10. Soaring rent and gentrification. In the past 2 years, Florida's rental market has exploded, and not in a good way. In cities like Miami, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has skyrocketed to over $2,400 per month. Even smaller cities like Tampa and St. Petersburg have seen double-digit rent increases every year. For many working-class Floridians, nurses, baristas, rideshare drivers, keeping up with rent has become impossible. The rise in remote work during the pandemic brought an influx of wealthier out-of-state residents, which pushed housing prices even higher. And as high-end developments continue replacing older, affordable homes, long-time residents are being priced out of their own neighborhoods. This isn't just about rising prices, it's about gentrification, where entire communities are slowly erased. Once affordable blocks are now filled with luxury condos and expensive cafes. Landlords are using every legal loophole to evict tenants and raise prices. Some offer buyouts to kick people out early. Others simply let properties fall into disrepair, pushing out those who can't fight back. For someone already living paycheck to paycheck, one missed rent payment can mean being out on the street, and there's nowhere else affordable to go. Florida has a severe shortage of low-income housing, and waiting lists for public assistance can stretch for months or even years. What's most shocking is that many of the newly homeless are working full-time jobs. They're not lazy, addicted, or choosing to live on the street. They simply can't afford shelter in a system that's no longer built for them. It's becoming normal to see Uber drivers sleeping in their cars after long shifts, or hotel workers washing up in public restrooms. This rental crisis is just the beginning, but it sets the stage for everything else we'll uncover in this countdown. Because when shelter becomes a luxury, survival becomes a nightmare. Number 9. Eviction tsunami post-COVID. When the COVID-era eviction moratoriums were lifted, a quiet storm began to roar through Florida's cities and suburbs. For many, that temporary pause on rent didn't erase their debt. It simply delayed the inevitable. As landlords regained the legal power to evict, the courts were flooded. Between 2023 and 2025, Florida recorded over 400,000 eviction filings, making it one of the highest eviction rates in the country. Families, single parents, the elderly, all found themselves facing sheriffs at their doors with nowhere to go. The system wasn't prepared for the wave, and worse, there was no backup plan. Many of these evictions came without warning. Some tenants received only a few days' notice. Others were removed while still in legal dispute, simply because they didn't understand their rights or couldn't afford legal help. The process was fast, brutal, and largely invisible to the public eye. What happens to a single mother with 2 kids when her apartment locks are changed while she's at work? Where do the elderly go when their fixed income no longer covers rent? With shelters overwhelmed and few affordable units left, the street becomes the default option, not a choice but a sentence. And this crisis didn't just affect those living in poverty. Middle-class families, even some with steady incomes, were swept into homelessness due to a single job loss, medical emergency, or rent increase. People who once donated to shelters now find themselves lining up for help. Florida's eviction crisis is the ugly, often unseen consequence of a society that doesn't protect renters in hard time. And once someone is evicted, it becomes 10 times harder to find a new place because eviction records follow them everywhere. This wave of forced displacement is feeding Florida's homeless explosion like gasoline on fire, and we're only at number 9. mind. Number 8. Broken mental health system. One of the most overlooked reasons behind Florida's growing homeless crisis is its severely broken mental health system. Florida consistently ranks near the bottom in the U.S. for mental health funding, spending far less per capita than most other states. This has created a dangerous gap where people with serious conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or PTSD have no access to proper care, medication, or long-term support. And without that safety net, many end up on the streets, wandering in confusion, fear, or total isolation. These aren't just numbers. They're human beings left behind by a system that treats mental illness like an afterthought. Even for those who try to get help, the system is a maze of red tape. Public clinics are understaffed, overbooked, and underfunded. Appointments can take months. Medications are hard to access. In many cases, people are only given short-term treatment in emergency rooms or temporary psychiatric holds, then discharged right back into the environment that triggered them in the first place. For someone battling mental illness without family support or stable housing, this becomes a revolving door of survival, relapse, and re-traumatization. And once on the street, mental health often worsens rapidly, turning treatable conditions into lifelong disability. What's worse is how society often criminalizes mental illness instead of treating it. People experiencing psychosis or manic episodes are often arrested for loitering, disturbing the peace, or resisting arrest. They're thrown into jails instead of hospitals, where they receive punishment, not healing. Imagine losing your home because you couldn't afford therapy, and now being labeled a criminal because your mind couldn't handle the chaos. That's the dark reality for thousands of Floridians right now. Mental health isn't just part of the homeless crisis. It's fueling it, and the system in place is doing next to nothing to stop the fire. Number 7. Substance abuse surge. Florida's homeless crisis isn't just about a lack of housing. It's also about a public health emergency that's exploding in plain sight. In the last 2 years, the streets have become the front lines of a rising wave of drug addiction, driven by powerful substances like fentanyl, methamphetamine, and the horrifying newcomer known as xylazine. In 2024 alone, overdose deaths among Florida's homeless population jumped by 35%, and that's just what was reported. These aren't back alley addicts. Many are people who started with prescription medications, lost their homes, and turned to drugs to numb the pain, trauma, and cold. What makes this crisis even more terrifying is that the drugs themselves have changed. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, often laced into other substances without warning. Tranq, a sedative meant for animals, causes skin-rotting wounds and has no known antidote. When someone uses, they're not just chasing a high, they're rolling the dice with death. And yet, for many living on the street, drugs feel like the only escape from an unbearable reality. With no home, no job, and no support system, addiction becomes a coping mechanism until it becomes a death sentence. Rehabilitation centers in Florida are severely underfunded, with long wait lists and limited space, especially for those without insurance. That means the people who need help the most are the least likely to get it. Many shelters won't even admit individuals who are actively using drugs, pushing them further to the margin. Instead of offering treatment, the state pours money into enforcement and cleanup, treating addiction as a nuisance instead of a disease. Until that mindset shifts, Florida's homeless crisis will continue to be fueled by addiction, and the streets will remain crowded with people not just struggling to survive, but quietly dying in plain sight. Number 6. Inadequate shelter infrastructure. Imagine finally building up the courage to seek help, only to be told there's no room, no bed, and no space for you. That's the reality for thousands of homeless individuals in Florida right now. Despite the rising need, the state's shelter infrastructure is woefully inadequate, outdated, and completely overwhelmed. In some major cities, shelters are operating at over 110% capacity, turning people away every night. Others have shut down altogether due to funding cuts or health violations. This leaves people with no other option but to sleep in parks, under bridges, or outside city buildings, even in extreme heat, rain, or hurricanes. And even when shelters do have space, many are not safe or welcoming environment. There are strict curfews, limited privacy, and reports of theft, violence, and harassment inside the facilities. Families are often forced to split up, mothers sent to one shelter, fathers to another, and teens placed alone in overcrowded youth centers. LGBTQ+ individuals, especially transgender people, frequently face discrimination or denial of services, making the street feel safer than the shelter itself. For many, it's not a choice to stay outside. It's a calculation of risk. Suffer in unsafe conditions inside or survive exposed but alone. Florida also lacks transitional housing programs, which help people move from shelters into permanent homes with support. Without these stepping stones, people fall back into homelessness, restarting the cycle. The few programs that do exist are underfunded, often relying on grants and donations that don't cover long-term needs. Shelters are meant to be a short-term emergency solution, but in Florida, they've become a permanent waiting room to nowhere. Until the state invests in safe, inclusive, and scalable shelter options, even those who want help will be trapped in a system that promises protection but delivers little more than a thin blanket and a hard floor. Number 5. Criminalization of homelessness. Instead of addressing the root causes of homelessness, Florida has doubled down on punishment. In recent years, the state has passed laws that make it illegal to sleep in public, camp on sidewalks, or even rest in your car overnight. Police are being sent into homeless encampments, not with social workers or support, but with handcuffs, citations, and bulldozers. People already at rock bottom are being fined, arrested, and jailed for simply existing in public spaces. It's not just cruel, it's counterproductive. You can't arrest your way out of a housing crisis. These laws are often passed under the guise of cleaning up the streets or restoring public order, but the reality is much darker. When someone is arrested for sleeping outside, they end up with a criminal record, which makes it even harder to get housing or employment later on. And what happens when they're released? They go right back to the street, only now with more barriers than before. It becomes a vicious cycle. Jail, release, street, repeat. Some cities have even started issuing move-along orders, where people are forced to wander from one block to another, constantly harassed but never helped. This approach doesn't just fail the homeless, it wastes taxpayer money. Cities spend millions every year on policing, court costs, and temporary jail stays, all while ignoring the cheaper and more effective alternative: housing and supportive services. Studies have shown that permanent supportive housing costs less than constant arrests and emergency room visits. But Florida continues to criminalize poverty instead of treating it. Imagine being punished not for breaking a law, but for having nowhere else to go. That's the daily reality for thousands across the state. And until that mindset changes, every tent cleared is just another person pushed deeper into desperation. If this video opened your eyes, don't just scroll away. Drop a comment and let us know which reason hit you the hardest. We pour real effort into every video to tell the stories others ignore. So please support us with a quick click to subscribe. It's free, but it means everything. Number 4. Climate and natural disasters. Florida isn't just battling a housing crisis. It's also at the mercy of a relentless climate emergency. Every year, the state faces stronger hurricanes, deadlier heat waves, and rising sea levels that push vulnerable communities out of their homes. For people already living on the edge, a single storm can be life-shattering. Tents don't survive 80 miles per hour winds. Cardboard shelters collapse in the rain. Extreme heat becomes lethal when you have no shade, no AC, and no water. In 2025 alone, heat-related illnesses among the homeless spiked 42% in Florida. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's deadly. Natural disasters used to hit occasionally. Now, they're relentless and accelerated. And for the homeless, there's no warning system, no evacuation plan, and no backup. While wealthier residents flee to hotels or shelters, unhoused individuals are left behind, often with nowhere to go but flood zones and underpasses. FEMA trailers and emergency response efforts rarely reach them, and after the storm passes, the destruction often wipes out the few resources they had left. Stolen belongings, destroyed tents, contaminated water supplies. Every disaster makes it harder for someone to ever rebuild their life. And let's not forget climate displacement. As coastal properties flood or are swallowed by the sea, landlords rush to sell or renovate, displacing lower-income tenants in the process. It's called climate gentrification, and it's pushing more people into homelessness without ever making the news. Florida's warming climate is no longer just an environmental issue, it's a housing crisis multiplier, and the most vulnerable are paying the highest price. When nature turns violent and society turns its back, being homeless in Florida becomes not just a struggle, but a constant battle to survive one more day. Number 3. Aging out of foster care. Every year in Florida, hundreds of teens age out of the foster care system, and many of them walk straight into homelessness. At just 18, they're expected to navigate adulthood alone, with no family, no stable housing, no financial support, and often no idea how to survive in the real world. Within the first year, nearly 1 in 5 of these young adults ends up homeless, and the numbers are rising. The state's safety net is thin at best and non-existent at worst. These aren't bad kids, they're forgotten kids, pushed out of a broken system and left to figure it out on the streets. Foster youth are among the most vulnerable in society. Many have already survived abuse, neglect, trauma, and instability, bouncing from home to home with no permanent support system. When they age out, they don't just lose a roof, they lose counselors, caseworkers, meal plans, and sometimes even access to school. Suddenly, they're expected to pay rent, find a job, go to college, manage bills, and maintain their mental health, all with zero preparation. With no emergency contacts and no second chances, it's no surprise that so many end up couch surfing, living in cars, or sleeping rough. And once they're on the street, life becomes a constant battle. They're at higher risk of exploitation, drug use, mental health decline, and even trafficking. Some turn to petty crime just to survive. Others simply disappear. What's worse is that these youth rarely qualify for adult homelessness services because they're considered young adults, not families or chronically homeless. Florida's failure to support foster kids after age 18 is creating a pipeline directly into the homeless population. We're not just watching a system collapse, we're watching it set children up to fail. And unless this cycle is broken, the streets will keep filling with tomorrow's forgotten adults. Number 2, lack of unified statewide strategy. One of the biggest reasons Florida's homeless crisis feels so chaotic is because, at its core, there is no unified plan. Every county, city, and local agency operates independently, creating a tangled web of inconsistent policies, scattered funding, and broken communication. There's no centralized system to track who needs help, where resources are going, or which programs are actually working. Instead of working together, agencies are often duplicating efforts, or worse, letting people slip through the cracks entirely. In a crisis of this size, disorganization is deadly. For example, someone experiencing homelessness in Miami might have access to a shelter, while someone just 20 miles away in Broward County might face a 6-month waitlist. One city may offer addiction support or housing vouchers, while the next has nothing at all. This patchwork approach leaves people confused, unsupported, and constantly moving from one jurisdiction to another, never getting stable, long-term help. And without a centralized data system, it's almost impossible to measure success or hold anyone accountable. It's like trying to put out a wildfire with a dozen hoses all spraying in different directions. Other states, like Utah and even parts of California, have attempted coordinated approaches, combining housing, mental health services, job training, and support into a centralized system. While not perfect, they've seen measurable reductions in chronic homelessness. Florida, by contrast, keeps throwing money into disconnected programs that treat symptoms, not causes. Until the state steps up with a real statewide strategy, not just words but action, this crisis will continue to grow. Homelessness is not a city issue or a county problem. It's a statewide emergency, and treating it like anything less is a recipe for continued failure. Number 1, political neglect and mismanagement. At the heart of Florida's homeless crisis lies a brutal truth. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because of decisions made at the top. For years, political leaders in Florida have downplayed, ignored, or actively worsened the issue through neglect, budget cuts, and a focus on optics over outcomes. Instead of investing in long-term housing solutions, they've poured millions into policing encampments, criminalizing poverty, and passing flashy laws that make headlines but don't help anyone get off the streets. In 2024 alone, Florida spent $40 million more on clearing homeless camps than on building supportive housing. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. Rather than confronting the root causes, like mental health care, addiction treatment, affordable housing, and youth services, many lawmakers have framed homelessness as a behavioral or criminal problem, blaming individuals instead of a broken system. There's little accountability for where funds go, and almost no transparency in measuring impact. Housing proposals get stalled in bureaucracy. Promised reforms are quietly dropped, and community organizations, who are doing the hard work on the ground, are left underfunded and overwhelmed. This isn't just mismanagement, it's a failure of leadership at every level. And here's the chilling part. It's not that the system isn't working, it's that this is the system. A system that protects profits over people. A system that clears out visible poverty without solving it. A system that waits for public outrage to die down before going back to business as usual. Until Florida's leaders treat homelessness as a human rights issue, not a political inconvenience, nothing will change. The tents will grow, the overdoses will rise, and the public will be told it's all under control. But now you know the truth, and maybe that truth is the first step toward change. What's happening in Florida right now is not just a housing problem, it's a human crisis. Behind every statistic is a real person. A veteran sleeping under an overpass, a mother trying to keep her kids warm in a car, a teenager aging out of foster care with nowhere to turn. And while the tents, the overdoses, and the chaos may feel overwhelming, they are all symptoms of a much deeper disease, a system built to ignore the vulnerable instead of protect them. We've just uncovered the 10 most urgent reasons Florida's homelessness crisis is spiraling out of control. From skyrocketing rent to broken mental health systems, from drug chaos to political neglect, each factor is connected, feeding into the next like a chain reaction of failure. And unless that chain is broken, this won't stop in Florida. Other states are already seeing similar pattern. This could be a preview of what's to come for the rest of America. But here's the truth, it doesn't have to be this way. We have the knowledge, we have the resources. What's missing is the will from leadership, from institutions, and from us as a society. Change starts with awareness, and awareness starts with stories like this being told, watched, and shared. So if you've made it this far, you're already part of the solution. The next step, speak up. Share this video, start the conversation, because ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away, it just makes it easier to repeat.